Can you hear me now? Is it better? Not better? Better?
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody in there? Yeah.
Know that at any point we can stop and have a discussion about what the hell we're talking about and frameworks of normalcy, normality. I don't know what you want to call it. I'm so confused. Normality. Normal is really, really cool and really nice. Okay, you sleep on time, you wake up on time. I love normal.
So what you love is structure and routine.
Thanks, Divyanshu. Hi, Divyanshu. Welcome to The Curious Case of with me. Thank you so much for coming all the way early in the morning to be here for this show. I don't like to call my guests a label because everyone is many things. And I think that in this respect for today, the way I would like to introduce you is as someone who is very articulate and thoughtful, and hence I want to talk to you about this topic. But because people like conventional things also, he's a psychologist and he's, and an entrepreneur, and he has a very, very cool organization called Adventures Beyond Barriers, and many, many, many other cool things. Divyanshu's a really, really cool person in general. But today we're here because I love how well you articulate things and how much you've thought about the various things that they are to think about in life in a way that helps people sort of make sense of the chaos that we're in and the whole idea at Agatsu is always trying to help people make more informed decisions. And I think that once you sometimes getting clarity on even seemingly meta concepts can help you sort of navigate them in your own life. And so I wanted to talk about what is normal. So I learned about a few frameworks of normalcy. And I've been having this conversation with a few people. So when you ask anyone, what is the definition of normal? Well, most people stumble and fumble. And then I tried to dictionary definition it. I Googled what is the meaning of normal. And I don't think I have ever found so many different meanings for one word. Because there was like adjective, noun, and then within each type of field where normal is a word had a different definition. And so it was very interesting. And I wanted to sort of just highlight the frameworks of normal that we conventionally use without necessarily knowing that this is called the medical framework of normal. Automatically, in these, you see normal as not something that's good or bad, but you have a framework. So homeostasis and whatever medically is seen as normal, and anything that is not that would then become abnormal, which is not necessarily good or bad, it's just not normal. So in the medical model of normalcy, a fever, having 4 fingers on one hand instead of 5, anything that is different from what medicine sees as a healthy body would be abnormal. In the statistical model, it would be if there are 10 people in the room and one of them speaks English, then that person is the abnormal person because the rest of the room speaks Hindi. And then a behavioral model of normalcy would be doing things that are adaptive rather than maladaptive. So if I'm feeling cold, I should not jump into the cold. It would be abnormal for me to do a behavior that is taking me further away from being helpful. And then there's the cultural model where I put milk in my tea, but in the West, it would be very, very strange to put milk and adrak and all sorts of things. So there is culturally what is normal and what is not normal either. And I think this is important even in the way that we want to, even in the space of mental health, because mental illness is then not normal, even if you look at it from the medical framework of normalcy. And also the statistical model, because in the whole world, if you look how many people there are in the whole world, there are less people who have mental illnesses than people who don't. Behaviors exhibited by people with a mental illness because of their as symptoms are also often not adaptive and therefore abnormal from a behavioral point of view. And then I guess culturally as well. So, since we're talking about mental health and normal and not normal and all of those things, where do we start? What's normal?
I believe you must be the first person saying I can articulate my thoughts and I'm thoughtful, because my friends would disagree and most people would disagree, and that's okay. But I don't. I wouldn't define myself like that. So it's interesting that you think so, and that stood out for me. And this whole thing that you brought up about normal and what is normal, what in what context is something normal, not normal, or abnormal, is one of the most interesting things about life itself, about how we navigate through life, this world, what we believe, because end of the day, that's one of the things that shapes what we do, how we behave, how we perceive things. So it's actually extremely critical. So when you talked about medical model and physiology and bodies, right? An example came to mind, which is around the 1950s. Every single practitioner of science and philosophy and physiology and body anatomy and all of them said, as humans, our bodies are not designed to run a mile in under 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just impossible to do. It's a physiological limit. As humans, we'll never be able to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And I think it was 1952 or 1954 when I think it was Roger Bannister who ended up running a mile in under 4 minutes.
Wow.
And this was despite all the research and experiments and everything. And then they went to him and said, how did you do it? And you broke a record and this was impossible. And he said, what was? Oh, you broke the human limitation of running a mile in under 4 minutes. He's like, really? There was something like that?
Yeah.
And now you can write him off as an exception. But guess what happened? 2 weeks later, 2 more people broke that. And today it's become a norm.
Yeah.
It's no big deal.
Yeah.
So what changed? Did we suddenly change as human beings? Did our physiology change? Did we get propellers? Did we get jetpacks? What happened? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's terribly interesting when you start looking at it from a certain lens and how do you define it? And I think the whole problem with normal is what I call there's a trouble with normal.
Okay.
The minute you start wanting to define normal, you're getting into trouble territory. Because statistically, what is normal? It's just mediocre. It's just the average. It's if you plot everything on a normal distribution curve, the large mass will fall into that, and then if we decide all our decide everything based on that, we're missing out on the actual amazing stuff that's happening beyond the plus and minus 1z. I mean,
Yeah.
the 64%,
Yeah.
right? That's where magic is happening. The problem with normal, the trouble with normal is the way we're conditioned to believe that any deviation from the norm is problem, is abnormal, is something that needs to be punished, is something that needs to be whacked into place. Whereas if you think about it, evolution, right, happens only when something deviates from the norm.
Yeah.
So if you go back to your genetic history, some gene somewhere someday mutated, right, and said, I'm not going that way. I'm going this way.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of water. I think the land is beautiful. I'm going to go take a walk. And guess what? The other genes must have said to him or her. Come back! What are you doing? You're an outlier. You're outlawed. You'll be excommunicated. And the gene must have said, I don't care. I'm going. And that one gene that deviated from the norm helped us evolve.
Yeah.
And that's largely the principle of evolution. But
Yeah.
then deviance is always punished. All kinds of deviance is always punished.
Yeah, so I feel like one trouble definitely is when you're trying to define normal, and then the other trouble also comes about when you're trying to decide when you put values to whether being normal is good or bad or being deviant is good or bad. And that also comes with just how culture puts values on the words that we use, and so these words then get connotations, right? Which we may or may not intend. Because while you were speaking, you were talking about the statistical average, and you said, what is normal? It's just mediocre. And the word mediocre itself has a bit of a less than what you like kind of connotation.
Correct.
Which is not necessarily what you meant. It just, statistically speaking, it just means that is the most common occurrence of, so like
Correct.
on a graph, like just to give an example for the audience, if the average height of an Indian is 5.3 feet or whatever, the idea is that if we put 10,000 Indian people in a room together and we measured them, what we'd see is that most of them would fall under that category of people, and then therefore they would be normal and everyone else would be abnormal. And so from the concept of trying to define it and have one definition for what is normal and what isn't, to the aspect of putting a value to whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. And it's interesting what you said about that's how a species evolves as well, right? There will be some mutations or some deviance from the norm that will die out because it doesn't survive, or it can't survive. And then there'll be some mutations that, make us move ahead in the larger scheme of things. And I like this example the best, where I often ask people, like at Agatsu, we sort of discuss these different frameworks of normalcy, normality, I don't know what you want to call it. I'm so confused. Normalcy, normality, normalness. And I often ask them, what do you think is the best model of normal? And a lot of them will say the statistical model because it seems to be the most ethical one, like the most objective one. And then I'm like, okay, great. So all of us have COVID. Statistically speaking, in this room, that is normal. We should do nothing about it. And then we'll all just die. And so starting to realize that you can use different frameworks of normal at different times in your life.
Correct.
which then leads me to, so then what is it? Because, like, why do I need to know whether something is normal or not? What difference does it make? And where I reached is that being able to decide whether something is normal or not informs us about whether we want to act on something or not. That's where I've reached. But I wanted to hear your thoughts.
So, to me, context matters. If I have to step back, we have to put things into context, into perspective, and also an important thing is who's asking the question, right? Because with it, one is, of course, like you said, you could use a cultural lens. Things look different. You use a statistical lens. Things look different. You use a medical model. Things look different. So also to understand it from a certain contextual framework. If you look at it from a cultural perspective, what's quote unquote normal here may not be normal 200 kilometers from here. So then your answer changes. If you look at it from statistical modeling perspective, then it's also about how you slice that data and how you giving meaning to that data. Because data is just one thing. We're also interpreting that data, and what is that data telling us? So it's really about how you're looking at that data. It's about who decides what is normal. Because is something normal simply because mathematically more number of people have it? Does that make it normal? Or is it that that a few people have access to something amazing that most don't have, but that is really normal? How do you decide? Who decides? And the next thing is, of course, we then use these things to define society.
Yeah.
That's where the trouble is. Because the minute you start using these as your frames of reference, right? You're actually limiting your own. It's extremely limiting, right?
Yeah, I'd just like to give some examples because I think that it's when we talk in frameworks and lenses, at least I've realized that until someone gave me some real life examples, I didn't realize how day to day and every single day in my life this is playing out without me realizing that it's playing out, right? So, if you have examples, then please go ahead. Some that I know of is if I start crying right now, it might seem abnormal, but if you place me in a funeral and I start crying, it's perfectly normal for me to be crying, and you wouldn't wonder why I'm crying. So context, matters a lot. And if there's a job interview that I've been really looking forward to, it's abnormal for me to not wake up early, for me to show up for that job interview in my pajamas without having brushed my hair. That would seem like a really abnormal thing for me to do because I want this job and I know that what they're expecting of me is to be well dressed and ready. And so to me that would be a maladaptive behavior because if I want this job, I wouldn't do that. I would make sure that I'm well groomed. And I see that there are some reasons to label things. And let's say calling something normal is also essentially labeling it, right? It's because we're categorizing something. And for some amount of productive work to happen, sometimes we need to categorize something. And then those categorizations, your questions have an answer to, as in who decided this is normal. It'll be the CEO of the company decided that this is normal workplace behavior in this company at this time. And why will also then have an answer. He or she will be like, I set up these rules for this reason so that this work can get done in this way, in this amount of time. And so then when you set up a frame of reference of what is normal and what is not, it helps you figure out whether you're going in the direction that you intended to or you didn't intend to.
Wonderful.
And so but never are we just...
then we can rephrase it to what's functional and dysfunctional to you.
Yeah.
Because then we free ourselves from these shackles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we look at everything anew to ask ourselves, hey, what's most important for me to get this job done? Does it matter to me if my employee comes in their pajamas, but they have the skills to do this job? Or is it more important that they come in a formal suit and have half the talent to do this job? Is it possible then? What's the intended outcome? And if you define it by the intended outcome, then you have Ricardo Semler, who's running a $5 billion company with practically no rules.
I just wanted to check if I've understood correctly. When I was trying to give different examples of ways of times in which maybe categorization is helpful, you sort of decided that there was an alternative word for it. For example, when I was talking about the company example, you said, okay, then let's not use normal and abnormal, let's use functional and dysfunctional. And so like if there was a different example where we would look at it from a medical model per se, for example, and you are sneezing all the time, and that is not normal. And so that would give you an indicator that maybe you should go and speak to a doctor. And in that scenario, having a sense of what is normal and not normal is beneficial.
Yeah.
In the
if
sense
I'm
that
sneezing all the time, it's causing me discomfort.
Yes.
It's not allowing me to do my work.
Yeah, so I mean, what I mean to say is that for some reason, whatever reason, the world has come up with these these frameworks of normal and what is not normal. And for some reason, evolutionarily, through the evolution of civilization, these frameworks have stayed, right? And if the base assumption is that if something doesn't work, it gets discarded, then there must be some use for these.
It's heuristics. It just because we such are the way we process information cognitively, we are energy conservationists, and it helps as a mental shortcut.
Okay.
So from that perspective, yes, from a mental shortcut perspective.
So what you're saying is that one of the reasons that we do that this trait of categorizing and finding these mental shortcuts has stayed is because we as a species like to conserve energy and spend it on things that we think we have to, and things like that. So we would make frameworks and points of references to reduce the amount of load on our cognition.
Most people just drift through life because they're not asking one level, one step below, right? And I understand our attentions are limited and there are constantly things competing for our attention, and our brains will get fried. For the most part, I get it. For daily living, you can get by, but is it enough to get by? When it matters, are we asking these questions?
If we can maybe sort of talk about how these things affect the quality of our life, then people can conceptually understand and then choose when they want to spend that cognitive energy
Absolutely.
not picking the mental shortcut. Right?
Absolutely.
So at least then you're deciding, okay, in this case, I'm fine using the mental shortcut. It's helpful. But there are, XYZ things that I don't want to be a mental shortcut, that I want to be mindful about. What is funny? What is funny to you versus what is funny to me? So I can say breasts, I can say boobs, I can say tits. At what point does it become vulgar for you? And at what point is it not? Right? So for some people, it'll be like, that's making me a little bit uncomfortable. The language is a little crass. And for some 16-year-old boys, they'll find it funny. Right? So people's definition of what is funny, what is not. For example, I've never, in real life, I've never seen someone hit someone else. I've only seen it on a screen. The most I've seen is a tuple. Wow. And a tuple doesn't hurt. So if it hurts, then it's automatically not a tuple. Right? Now, this is not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a good thing that I am so sheltered from any form of violence. Because if I see someone hit someone on the road, I might get really bothered by it. And maybe we live in a world where I shouldn't be so sensitive and sheltered to what could be outside. Now, someone who gets beaten up at home every day will not see being beaten up as violent behavior. They will see, if someone uses a chain, then they'll see that. They'll count that as violent.
Correct.
That'll be not normal. So I will look when it is beyond my framework of normal.
Correct.
Now, this will happen in all sorts of places.
It's super interesting because if you use that same example for disability, for mental health, right?
Yeah.
Would it be abnormal if we grew up having all of exposure to disability, to mental health, to mental illness, all of that, growing up? Would it be something that is abnormal, or would it just be part of life?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even notice it? Because if you go abroad, in many countries like the UK or New Zealand, Australia, or US, seeing somebody with a disability is just like, if you see somebody in a wheelchair, it's just that. Nobody even bats an eyelid. Seeing somebody who's blind, nobody even bats an eyelid. But here, you're stared at. Even when we have way more number of people with disability, but we're invisible. So it's not normal to see somebody who's blind, or somebody in a wheelchair, or somebody with mental health condition.
Yeah.
And if we were to just grow up with it, then it'd just be that.
Yeah.
No different.
Yeah. And so, a lot of times, once you normalize something, it's really hard to notice. When you have a child, you are now imprinting your lens of normal onto them. And if you haven't decided whether you like your lens of normal, you might be imprinting something on them that you don't like. For example, if I'm a people pleaser, okay, like very badly people pleaser, to a level where it is kind of unhealthy. I mean, I've worked on it now, but I would want to know that about myself so that I didn't make my child think it is normal to behave the way I'm behaving. And if you look at more serious and extreme cases of abuse, if I'm getting abused but I'm not standing up for myself, I am showing my child that this is normal behavior, and they're going to grow up thinking that this is normal behavior. So people will say, but who's normal? And when I realized this, it has stuck with me. And how, whose definition of normal are you living by?
Absolutely.
So I'm not normal, you're not normal, but I get to choose what my normal is.
Right.
And I get to choose whether I'm living by your definition of normal or my definition of normal. So if we're trying to understand when people say the word normal around us, when expectations are set, because that's what normal is, right? It's an expectation.
Yeah.
And so when expectations are set, or when people around us say this is normal or this is how it needs to be, in what instances can I be like, yeah, okay, and it's not going to affect the way I live my life and the quality of my life? And in what aspects do I need to think about it and see whether that is how I want to live my life, whether it is something that is affecting the quality of my life? How to question the construct of normal so that you can live the life
Absolutely.
you want to.
But we never take the moment to ask ourselves that.
So what do you think the questions should be?
Well, there are a bunch of questions you can ask yourself. The very first question is, where is the evidence that this has to be so? Most of the times, it's just perpetuation. I don't have any evidence that it must be so. It's just perpetuation. It's just because that's how things have been. And just because things have been doesn't mean things have to continue to be so.
It's really interesting that you say that, because we did another episode on blaming your parents, and we spoke to a psychoanalyst, and she was talking about how we will always respond to the present in the way that we have experienced the past, whereas the present might be different now.
Correct.
And
But you've got to question it in the present.
yeah, so in the present, no matter what you've experienced in the past and whatever, maybe mental shortcut has been made in the past,
Right.
you have to check whether in this context,
Correct.
is there evidence for this in this context?
Just because I've had 3 broken relationships in the past and they were very hurtful, doesn't mean the 4th one is going to be the same.
Yeah.
But if I continue the same, it will end up being the same.
Yeah.
There is no, and just because I've had 3 broken relationships in the past, where is the evidence that the 4th one also will end up the same way?
Yeah.
No evidence. And it's if you really ask that question, it's fairly easy. How are you defining it for yourself? What is the price I want to pay for it? Because either ways, I'm going to pay a price. Am I willing to pay the price? So here I am. Let's assume that I'm married, and I also fall in love with somebody else.
Okay.
Would that be normal? Would that be considered normal? Would that be not normal? Will I be? I might feel terrible guilt for it. Right? So here I am now feeling terribly guilty for feeling a certain way towards another person being married. And the other way to look at it is, where is the evidence that I can't love 2 people at the same time? Where is the evidence that people can't be polyamorous? And just because I love 2 people at the same time, does it make me a bad person, deserving punishment? But often, because of societal structures, I may end up feeling absolutely awful about myself.
Yeah, because the other things are also important in context. Like, have you spoken to the person you're married to about it? Are they okay with it?
No, that's next level. Often I don't even have to go down to that level. I will punish myself. I don't need anybody else to punish me. I'm enough.
No, of course, I know. I meant, polyamory and multiple relationships is very, can be very painful for some people to discuss and talk about. apart from just the social stigma around it, because
Correct.
feelings can be hurt in those situations. And so, and polyamory is very different from infidelity, and those sorts of things. So, if, like you said, mental shortcut, if all I look at is Divyanshu's married, he loves someone else as well, and if I take my mental shortcut, then that's it.
Yeah.
He has to
What
be
a-
punished.
Oh yeah. What
Right?
a what a
What a
terrible
horrible person.
Yeah.
But if I stop and I don't use that mental shortcut and I'm like, okay, does he want to do anything about this? Has he spoken to his wife about this? Maybe she's fine with it. Maybe she's also polyamorous. Maybe, right? Like, depending on the context that I then set up and the nuances that I look at, it may still not be normal in the culture, but he may not need to be punished because he's not hurt anybody and he's not necessarily done something that has caused pain to somebody. Whether you are allowed to punish him or not is a completely separate conversation.
And fundamentally, are you saying it's not possible to love two people at the same time? It's possible.
Yeah, of course.
And if I go to Africa, it's quote unquote normal to have 4 wives. It's perfectly fine, and they have, and forget 4 wives, they have 4 husbands. So, and they love each other and they live very comfortably and very happily. So again, it's that's the question I need to ask myself, because often if I just even realize that, hey, I actually love 2 people, it's enough for me to feel that I'm some kind of an abnormal person. Because I have those perpetuated beliefs, I have those perpetuated norms that I've just taken on of the society that I'm living in. But I've never questioned those beliefs. I've never questioned those norms. I've just taken it as gospel truth.
So what do you think is this? Why do we strive towards being normal, and what is the obsession with being
I don't know
normal?
why. I don't know. I really don't know why. Because
Well, I think
because normal is boring, isn't it? Normal is boring. I don't know why.
No.
No,
I love normal. Normal is really, really cool and really nice. Okay? You sleep on time, you wake up on time. I love normal.
So what you love is structure and routine.
Thanks, Divyanshu.
Not normal, because that's normal for you, not normal for me.
Sure. So I think I had this conversation at my wedding. The photographer was trying to get me to say, interview me or something just before the vows. And he said, how are you feeling? And I said, normal. And he was like, eh? He was so upset with my answer. He was just like, you are not giving me what I want. Can you please say something dramatic? And I was like, but that's not how I'm feeling. I'm feeling normal in the sense that I'm feeling at ease.
All right.
And comfortable, and it doesn't feel like something big and special and grand, and I feel like what I'm getting into seems right. It seems like what I should be getting into. And so in that sense, it felt normal. But also, I feel like there are a bunch of people who strive towards being normal, and then there are a bunch of people who strive towards being anything but normal. And I'd like to take a step back from even that and be like, why do you want, is it helpful for you to be normal? Or is it normal, quote unquote? Or is it helpful for you to be extraordinary? Why are you trying to get to wherever it is that you are trying to get? Whether where you're trying to get to is normal, or whether where you're trying to get to is extraordinary or abnormal. Why are you doing that? And is it being helpful to you in the context that you're in at that time?
So the simple thing is whatever works for you. Most people don't ask what works for them. What? No, there's no judgment. There's no judgment about anybody. But the fundamental truth is we don't ask ourselves what's working. We don't ask ourselves what I'm doing. Like we live such cookie cutter lives. You go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you get a bunch of EMIs.
So do you want to say kids?
And then the kids happen, of course. By then you become 25, then you're allowed to drink because now you have a bunch of EMIs and kids. So the government says, okay, now you can drink. and that's a cookie cutter model. But we never question this model, do we? And many are okay with that, and I guess that's okay with them.
Yeah, and that's fine. If that's working for you, then...
Yeah, if that's okay with you, I'm okay with that. It's not okay with me.
For yourself.
And for myself. And simply because it's not okay for me, it also means that I've had to pay that price, and I'm okay with paying that price.
But you don't use the word price as necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Or a painful thing.
No.
A price is just, there is just consequence.
Absolutely. There is some payoff, some consequence that's going to happen anyways, whether you do it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather do it. I'd rather do it and find out.
Yeah.
Even if it is painful, I'd rather do it and find out. Because if I don't, I would never know. For even attempting to try, there are two things that I know might happen. I might fail. I might get ridiculed. I might get rejected. All of that is possible. Or we set a new standard and a new norm.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what I referred to, the 4-minute mile. Now it's a new norm.
Yeah.
100 years ago, women going to school and university and working in urban was not a norm. Today it's a norm.
Yeah.
But, Savitribai Phule was stoned for it.
Yeah.
So she did pay that price, didn't she?
Yeah.
In that way. But she questioned where is it written that women can't go to school, or women can't get educated, or women can't work. But in that context, 100 years ago, she was an outlier. But we wouldn't have progressed if it wasn't for her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about, asking ourselves these things, and asking ourselves these things necessarily comes with, of course, expending more energy, spending time with yourself, asking what is really most important to you, what are your priorities in life, and what makes you most happy. What makes me most happy is to challenge these notions. Somebody may not be happy doing that. They might just be happy doing the exact same thing every single day, and knowing that tomorrow is going to be exactly the same way as today.
Yeah.
And that's okay for them. But that's not okay for me. It comes back to from whose perspective.
So we've had a lot of conversation about the word normal, philosophically, as well as we've tried to also bring it into one's day-to-day life and things that you have to consider. Just to end, I think I would like to ask you if you could leave us with sort of like a takeaway in terms of how one can think about when we feel like we are not normal, quote unquote normal, and that is coming in the way of us being either what we want to be, who we want to be, or just happy and content in who we are. For example, I'm short, and if I continue to think that being a little bit taller is what's normal, how do I get to a place where I realized that it's okay to be whatever height I am, because, like you told us, who decided that that is what is a normal height? And why did they decide that this was the normal height? And all of those other things. So what would be your takeaway?
If I really ask myself, what does it really boil down to from a human experience perspective? I think as humans, it's a human endeavor to feel belonged. We all want to feel belonged. We all want to fit in. We all want to be accepted. I think, and we all want to be loved at the end of the day and to know that we're okay. I think if you keep that in mind, then I realize that what happens when I think I am not normal, I'm short, I'm fat, I'm dark, all of these lead to me feeling excluded, me feeling not belong, me not fitting in, and those are psychological price that we pay for that. And if we can not look at the fact that I'm short as compared to the to what is the average, but ask myself, now that this is, what can I do with it? What does it stop me from? And how does it stop me from? What can I do to lead a more functional life by looking at what I have? I really feel we will get out of this unnecessary debate and argument about what's normal and what's not, and but rather ask ourselves better questions of how can I lead my life to my fullest potential. And if that's our endeavor, that we live our lives and have societies where we all thrive and live to our fullest potential, I think over time we'll drop this whole frame of reference of normality and what's normal and what's not, and then we'll live a much more productive life, I guess.
So I guess what you're saying is, instead of asking what's normal and what's not normal, the question really would be to ask yourself, am I living by the framework that makes me most functional? And now when we say the word functional, we don't only mean it from a corporate productivity manner. We mean it from a happiness
Potential.
and potential of
Human
whatever.
potential.
Yeah, human
Yes.
potential.
Absolutely.
Side.
And then it can be whatever. Can I live to my fullest potential with or without my sight? Can I live to my fullest potential even if I'm short, or even if I'm fat, or even if I am have a mental condition? Irrespective of all of those things, can I still live to be my fullest potential?
Yeah. Or what do I need to do, or what do I need to understand to be able to live
Correct.
to my fullest potential
Absolutely.
with whatever it is I have or don't have?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah.
a hopeful note to end on. Thank you. We usually do an activity at the end of every episode where at Agatsu we have something that we call emotional hygiene. It has various aspects, but one of them is about how the brain is naturally hardwired to notice the negative things in your life because it needs to save you from threat. So the idea is that from this morning, when you woke up till now, what is one thing that went well or was good or was not bad? So you will always crib when there is traffic, but you forget to celebrate when there isn't traffic. So something between this morning.
100 things went well today since
I
morning.
know you're just
I
an
mean-
optimistic, happy person, Divyanshu, but you have to
The
pick
only thing, it was a beautiful morning. I had a perfect morning, I had a perfect ride. I was very happy. We came by the Atal Bridge, and it's amazing. I met a friend, so that was serendipitous. In the middle of the highway, Imagine, it's
That is
200 kilometers
yeah.
stretch, and I meet him, and he's just a minute away. I call him, and I say, "Hey, I've just stopped here for breakfast." And he's like, "Where have we stopped?" I'm like, "Where are you?" And he's like, "I'm a minute away from there." I'm like, "No way."
Damn it, now I have to think of one. You have so many.
But it's been an amazing morning.
I had a good therapy session. So I guess that's my little thing for the day. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you for watching The Curious Case Off with me. In the description below, there will be links, further reading, summaries, guidelines, resources, everything that we could find and put together that we think you might find helpful. Just to reiterate that everything that is said in the episode as well as in the resources below should not be used to self-diagnose. If you have any questions or queries, please reach out to a mental health professional who is qualified. And if you like the episode, then like, share and subscribe to Agatsu Foundation, our YouTube channel. And if you want to know anything more about the organization, then you can find out at www.agatsufoundation.org.